go down the line and kind of everyone share their position on that?
I would say not completely off the table. It just kind of depends with each situation. But for mental illness, like, it would be taken out completely. But for, I guess, some other things, maybe not, but it would kind of vary, though.
I would say that it should be off the table because we're all made to be with other people, and so making someone and putting them by themselves for a long extended time isn't going to give them help. They need help with other people, and they need resources to reach out to and get help from. So I would say that they need someone to talk to, they need therapy, they need to get the help that they can get in order to have a successful life.
And my opinion would be not completely off the table. Of course, in doing research, there was a case to where a woman who was showing signs of mental illness, she had not yet been diagnosed, but when she was put into solitary confinement due to injury to inmates around her, she was able to have some time and think about her actions, and then she realized that these symptoms are just getting worse while she's in the prison system, and then as soon as she was let out in her cell, she was able to seek medical help. So not completely off the table, but if someone is already diagnosed with a mental illness, I believe that the therapist or medical expert should be able to visit them while they're in there, so that way they can still continue their medical treatment on this person with mental illness to help them improve on it and make sure that they have a way to deal with it when they are ready to go back into society.
I believe it should be taken off the table because the UN Convention Against Torture defines torture as by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for information, punishment, intimidation, or for a reason based on discrimination. To me, solitary confinement is torture because if you want to stay in an 80 square foot cell for 23 hours a day, that is torture. God created Eve for Adam for a reason. We're creatures of relationships, and we cannot have these. We'd feel hopeless. We think there's no end to this. We can't have companions and think we can get through this together. And I think it just causes a lot of problems for the prisoners.
Those that wouldn't take it completely off the table, who would classify as somebody that you would put in solitary confinement if you were going to leave it on the table as an option?
I think it should be the medical expert who is there in the prison, and also the person who treated the people before they committed their crime and before they were inside the prison system. So based on that, they can go on like a scale to see what mental disease they have been diagnosed or are hypothesized to have a mental disorder, and depending on that, it could vary on people not or getting solitary confinement as a punishment.
So are you saying somebody that's super violent? I mean,
Some of
who
us-
gets solitary confinement as it is right now?
As of now, it's mainly depending on like, I think it's more like violent actions, and also, I believe it's mainly violent actions that get someone solitary confinement. I believe there are a few other factors that could lead to solitary confinement, but I cannot think of them right now.
For those that would take it off the table, I mean, obviously we're not just putting people in solitary confinement for no reason. These are probably individuals that are a danger to others, perhaps even a danger to themselves. So whether they have a mental health issue or not, what's your suggestion as far as dealing with these individuals if they're violent?
I would say we would just have we would have added security, and although I'm not saying that these people can't stay by themselves, for like over the night, but for 23 hours a day, it's excessive. I think if maybe you brought it to 14 or 16, that's more realistic, where people could still have the interactions with humans that are necessary for life, but also have that time where they're not a danger to others. And when there are around other people, I think there definitely needs to be security, because I understand that there's people that are violent. It's just not going to change.
How long does somebody typically have solitary? How long are they placed in solitary?
We've got some stats for this, actually.
Yeah, from usually like during the day they're held from 22 to 24 hours, and this goes on for 15 days consecutively.
Are there any benefits that you found research for solitary confinement besides what Mr. Small said about keeping perhaps violent people away from the rest of the prisoners?
Yeah, so I believe I said so before. There was a case to where a woman who was put in solitary confinement due to violent actions, and sometimes mental disorders that that person may have can discovered and they confined it themselves, or mainly by themselves, since they're not allowed to have human interaction while in solitary confinement.
The problem about finding a solution to a lot of these things is that normally we would do studies on things like this, the universities would, but no university is going to allow someone to do a study where they lock a human up in a cage for 23 hours.
And why
So
not?
it's really, because it's considered inhumane by the universities. So a lot of people will not sign on to do it. The last one that they really have an example of was it's actually pretty famous. It was at the University of Washington, Wisconsin, where they put monkeys in a cage like this, where they couldn't crawl out. And after a day, they would like start rocking in the corner, and they like once they were let back out into where they could interact with other monkeys, they like would stare off blankly and were really and started mutilating themselves. And so it's something that's kind of dark, and that's why a lot of people don't like to touch it, especially testing wise. So it's kind of hard to find an answer of what's really going on.
So this is a little bit confusing to me. So there's a behavior, or there's a practice that's going on in prisons that would not be allowed to be tested in the university setting. Why?
Because people think it's good because it's protecting other people, but really it's hurting the other person more than it's protecting everybody else.
Do you know how we ended up at the 15-day limit?
That's just kind of average. It can be longer than that, but most of the time it's between 15 days because I think people realize after 15 days and it's not necessarily good.
Is there ever a case though where it's the opposite of what you're saying? I understand that sometimes you put people in solitary confinement because they're dangerous. But what about if they request it, or what if the warden feels that someone needs to go there because others are ganging up on them? So it is for their own protection.
That is seen sometimes, like you'll see, especially with gangs, like if there's gangs in the prison, if a new inmate comes in they think might be involved in the gang, they might just go ahead and put them in solitary confinement. But that risk for that person having the mental illness is still there. That's something, personally, I wouldn't want to take.
Do all of the jails and prisons exercise or make use of solitary confinement?
No.
Not all of them, but they are prepared to take actions with solitary confinement if needed to. I believe all prison systems do have some form of solitary confinement if it were to come to that point, but not all of them practice it, mainly because the inmates are either mentally stable or they have been behaving while in there. But of course, throughout, if you look at the entire overlook of each prison, there probably has been at least one incident to where someone was put into solitary confinement. Maybe it was for safety, maybe it was for mental illness, maybe it was for a violent outburst. It kind of varies and depends on it, but I don't think we would be able to cover the entire history of each prison in the United States.
And over the states, the one with the most solitary confinement is Louisiana, and they have 15%. So they're, with solitary confinement, it's lower in the percentages. But also, how long, to go back on the 15 consecutive days, usually 18% say between 15 days to 1 month. But the most common is 1 to 3 months for how long inmates spend in solitary, and that's 29%.
Who makes the decisions of who goes into solitary confinement? Is it one person in the prison, or is it like a group of people who are in charge, or how does that work?
It depends. I believe there's a board inside the prison system that is there, like if something like this were to come up, like if they had to make a decision on an inmate, like I believe this is the same board that also like sees prisoners and see if they're okay to enter back in society, basically release forms and all that. This board is also the same. It's the same board that decides whether someone needs solitary confinement or not, and then I think that it's mainly up to them. I think they put it to a vote exactly. It's mainly based on like facts and information and stuff that they have gathered while they're in the prison.
Does TV, Hollywood, do they portray prisons in a healthy way, or do they
I would
project
say,
it?
like the TV show Orange is the New Black, I wouldn't say they portray it in a
Yeah.
great way, but it gives us an insight into what they're going through.
Did you do any research on what inside of a prison, like a daily life would look like?
I've seen shows and stuff, but I would say it's pretty bad. I mean, the food isn't that great. They're overpopulated with all the people. They're all in uniforms. Like, it's not ideal to be in a prison, but that's what they have to go through for their punishment, and then hopefully they'll find help and get better.
This is gonna switch gears just a little bit, and Tomas, I don't want you to answer this. Can any of you guys comment on the differences in private-run prison facilities versus government facilities?
Yeah.
And then maybe the effect that those things have on some of these issues?
So private-run prisons, they kind of, like, they're less expensive to operate than government-controlled prisons, just because, like, I don't really know how to put it into words, but just generally, since it's private owned and private operated, they're kind of using their own money sort of thing, so they're like benefiting the economy in a way, whereas the government, it's like their own kind of thing. So like for a privately run prison, they have to buy their own food, whereas a government owned prison, they kind of like go to the food operator or like food producer and just kind of like get the food at a much lower price than a privately owned prison would do. And so the privately owned prison, they'd pay like what we would pay. Government owned prison get a reduced rate for all the food and costs and everything. And so that would kind of take away from the economy.
And for one thing, to have private-owned prisons, you have to have prisoners. And so there's always that motivation that if we run out of prisoners, then there will be no more private-owned prisons, and that will increase someone's wealth. So that's a thing that kind of scares me personally about private-owned prisons, is that they're there. There always has to be prisoners to fill. And I think you could have, you could have a lot of dealing going on behind the scenes that could end up sending prisoners to a private-owned prison.
Why would a government allow or sort of source out their prison system to a private agency?
Overcrowding.
Pardon me?
Overcrowding. That's one of the main ones, pretty much.
Do you know what part of the country tends to use more privately owned prison systems?
I don't know.
Are they, because they're run by a private organization, are they still bound by the same, I guess, rules and laws that would protect prisoners in a public prison?
They're obviously supposed to be, but it's a lot harder to regulate stuff like that when there's not government people around all the time. So I believe that they're supposed to be, but I don't think they always are. I think there's some probably leeway with that.
Change gears here a little bit. When I taught health here, I had guest speakers in my health class. And one of my students brought in a dad who was a dentist at the federal prison here. And one of the things that he shared when he was talking with our classes is that he enjoyed doing prison dentistry. And the reason why he enjoyed it was because those patients, prisoners, were very polite and grateful. They always thanked him when he was done treating them, taking care of their teeth. So when was the last time you thanked your dentist when you had your teeth cleaned or a filling made or any of those type of things?
It's been a while.
And the reason why I ask that, I do it kind of funny, but at the same time, those that do prison ministry, my brother does prison ministry once a month in just a small, county in northeastern Kentucky. Most of those people are pretty easygoing type of people. They're not what's portrayed on Hollywood and TV and those type of things. It'd be more like Mayberry and Otis. They're getting Otis out and they're having a relationship with Otis. Many of y'all may not have seen that episode. But Otis is a pretty good guy. But those are the things that we have to kind of keep in balance. We always see the worst end of it on TV, but they are real life human beings, and they do have some good qualities and characteristics about them too sometimes. So just for food for thought, maybe we all should be more grateful to our dentists and doctors and people like that when we have normal checkups.
Guys, I'm curious about one of the things that you brought up to help curb overcrowding. Blaine, I think you mentioned marijuana and the potential to legalize that because people are already buying it, so why not make money off of it? Doesn't that kind of set a dangerous precedent, though? If someone is using it then why don't we just make money off of it to avoid overcrowding our prisons? Because currently they're breaking the law, and I'm just curious about the logic behind that. For example, like prostitution, right? Should we legalize that? It's a nonviolent crime. Should we legalize that?
I would say, though, that the reason a lot of the crimes that happen are because of marijuana. There's a lot of crimes that happen because, you know, he stole my weed, he ripped me off, you know. Things like that happen, and maybe that could even decrease the amount of violent crimes if we governmentally regulated it. Just like we do alcohol, we could tax it. And having places like that where we could put into effect, we could make money off of that and still not make it as a danger to society where people are dealing it, I think could really help everybody, not just people that make money.
Again, to elaborate on that, I think that I agree with Blaine's opinion that it should be government run, like, and it should be kept. It should have an eye on it, like almost at all times, because the reason people are selling drugs and weed and marijuana and all that is because, like, they're trying to provide for themselves. I don't really know if there's any other actual motivation besides, like, it's a way to get money, depending on the situation. But like, if we were to governmentally run marijuana and, like, have it under lock and key, it could possibly prevent other people from, prevent crimes that could lead people to go.
So what do you do with someone who says, I'm not going through the government, I'm going to grow it in my backyard myself? What happens to them when they get caught? Do they go to jail?
Yes, they should. Like, if this hypothetical situation of letting the government run the marijuana industry, we'll go with industry. The marijuana industry, if the government is running it and then they have, like, already released, like, laws that say, hey, you can work for us, work in these stuff, but you cannot do it on your own. You have to have, like, government approval or, like, I don't know, like some circumstance that allows them to work for the government technically. If the person says no, then it should be treated like an actual law and they should have received some form of punishment.
Where would you, again, if you're in support of that, where would you suggest the line should be drawn in that? Should the government then regulate things like heroin or other drugs?
Well, I mean, I'm mainly going off of marijuana here because I'll go with Mr. Galloway, did point out that marijuana is a form of depressant, that some people take it because maybe they do have a mental health issue and they are taking it to help them cope with that. I'm mainly using marijuana as an example because, well, it has been used as a depressant, and so if it has some sort of way to help mental instability, like people cope with it, then it should be regulated by the government and it could be put to good use instead of it being an illegal drug and, like, people are just taking it just for, like, whatever it does.
Marijuana also has some medicinal uses that legalizing it could help. They help some kids with, like, autism. They can help some forms of cancer and stuff like that. And so I think that's something you have to look into when you're saying legalize marijuana. It's not just the recreational use, it's also the medicinal use.
So in evaluating our prison system, would you say that it's successful?
I would say it's not, personally.
Not as much as it could be.
It could be more successful.
How would you measure success?
Probably by the statistics in the course of history over time, like the 77% that people go back into prisons. I mean, that's more than half of, like, well.
Okay, so you're measuring success based on recidivism rate, and so that's why you Blaine are saying it's not successful.
Yes.
How about the people that live out in Masterson Station, close to a federal prison, who feel safe enough to live there? Would they say that prison's being successful?
Yes, they might say that, but I don't necessarily think that when people get right out, it's not just like when they get out, they're like, time to commit a crime. I think once over time, they realize part of that is not being able to get a job. You know, maybe 3 months down the line, I can't get a job. I have a felony on my record. They're thinking, well, I'll just have to return back to that life of crime. And that's part of us as a society. we need to learn that people make mistakes, and that sometimes just because they went to prison, they're still